Plutarch, in his parallel life, recorded that Alexander was constantly troubled by a thought that when the number of worlds is infinite, I have not yet become the lord of a single one. In his time, in 300 BC, this was rather difficult to accomplish, but in the far future, hopefully with the aid of technology, as well as megalomania, such goals might become more attainable. But before a new Alexander awakened from his immarble tomb to conquer space, we have to consider some logistical and practical challenges to ruling this, well, massive empire. I'm Ranta Wu, and today let's explore how to govern a space empire. The first and most obvious point about space is it's extremely vast. So vast as to baffle our mind. Our own Milky Way, for example, is 100,000 light years across. And given the law of relativity, you will never be able to travel faster than light, no matter what, as it breaks the very laws of physics and existence. Hence, we must be creative and find a new way to solve this massive distance. Now, luckily for us, we are not the only despot and wannabe rulers throughout history that has run into this rather inconvenient issue of distance. Well, throughout history, many empires face this. The solution they usually found is to rule through a series of viceroys, satraps, diocleses, whatever you want to call them, to establish regional power centers from which your laws and ideals be imprinted and enforced. Now, it would be important to have layers upon layers upon layers of administration, each smaller section and subdivision answering to a higher one until ultimately it reaches you and your home planet or base or whatever you wish to call it. This is vital as within such a large empire, the hatred or discontent of the citizens would always be towards what they could visibly imagine. Or, to put it in another word, they would be angry at the lower management instead of yourself. Furthermore, the lower management should have protocols, procedures, as well as standard practices that are needed to deal with each circumstance without necessarily having to inform you and your central government of everything. For one, you will allow for possible deniability, which is always handy, especially given the fragile nature of your empire. And for two, this would, contradictory to what I have said previously, cut down on the amount of bureaucracy and administration needed. For at the end of the day, it is exceptionally expensive to maintain an empire of this scale. But nonetheless, hope the benefits could be worth it. What benefit am I talking about? Why, of course, the vast wealth that is to be gained from such great empire, the great glory as well as power you would possess. Furthermore, the extravagant capital that you would build up for yourself, through which your court itself becomes a source of power and control in of itself, as it becomes over time, through the accumulation of resources, the sole political, legislative, and administrative power within your empire, the site of your treasury, and of course the sheer extravaganza of the court, its luxury, its vast networks of entertainers, cooks, and various other artists and cultural figures at which your empire centers itself. Being the site of your treasury, which flows out to the civil and military servants of your vast empire, as well as to various clients, auxiliaries, as well as people you need to bribe, threat, and blackmail. This central piece, this internal city under your command and personal rule must be kept safe at all time. And furthermore, through its vast and I cannot emphasize this enough, vast economy, in contrast to the rest of your empire, it would be able to maintain control of your subjects. For not least they be cut off from this very center of the entire universe, just plunging their own systems into the internal pit of darkness from which they may never climb out of. And through such you may rule 1,000 years. However, not yet is your reign totally secure from potential usurpers from within. Hence, an ideology must be developed, a singular focus, a singular worship that emphasizes the indivisibility of your realm, which would unfortunately lead to a lot of ceremonies which you may have to attend, but those ceremonies, as mentioned before, is part of the protocol and rituals which keeps the empire alive. Now, young men may find their existence plain and immobile, unable to move forward, hence they would seek new places, and owing to the hegemony and sheer wealth of your capital, their newly created societies would ultimately fall back in line to you. As mentioned before, though, the point of having this empire is to have such wealth, not to deal with the pesky points of governance which you fundamentally cannot deal with thanks to the limit of the speed of light. What this means is those rituals must enshrine within the ruling class of the empire a consistent and stable ideology, a constant mission, a end goal in their worldview, one of to keeping your empire alive. Now, this fortunately is very effective through the means of education. The state of Greece, which achieved independence against the Ottomans in 1821, managed to pursue a singular foreign policy despite the changes of government, with varying ideologies from socialism to fascism, from monarchism to liberalism. Yet, throughout all this period, they managed to maintain a policy of Megalia Ideala, a concept of reclaiming every inch of the former Byzantine domain of the Roman Empire and restoring it to its glory. This was achieved through constant education from the very moment a child was able to read, reinforced by the church and society into this belief of an indivisible nature of Greek history, starting from classical times with an unbroken chain of succession through the Middle Ages in the form of Byzantium, the Roman Empire that never fell, continuing into modernity where its claims extended over all its former domains. Through this, it managed to ensure from 1821 to 1974 a ideology that is quite frankly more consistent than anything else within the nation. As I have mentioned before, the various changes of government, demography, economy, and borders, this ideology was kept alive through various means. Now, the many great heroes who have sacrificed themselves for your ideology must be rewarded. Medals must be given, saints and martyrs must be created. But ultimately, you must remember the principle of having governors to oversee your empires and having them act on a local scale while still dependent on the support provided by the homeworld. This is, after all, how the Roman Empire ruled itself for so long. For by the time of Diocletian, the empire realized that the centralized bureaucracy was simply too expensive, cumbersome, and, quite frankly, boring, inviting civil war after civil war. Instead, the empire was broken into pieces called diocleses, those who answered to the emperor ultimately depended upon the capital for the treasury. Such systems have been repeated throughout time through other states, such as Spain with viceroys, Persia with satrapies, and even the papacy adopted it. After all, the person above the bishop is a Diocles. Now, throughout all of this, we have assumed that you and your governors actually speak one common language, which, through the vast distance of space, might prove difficult. But this is a necessity. After all, if your governor cannot understand you and you are, again, in the worst case scenario, forced to act on their behalf, a rebellion could have broken out at one corner of your empire, say at one end of the Milky Way. It would take quite literally half of human existence for the word to, reach you if you were at the other end of the galaxy, and it would take another 100,000 years, assuming you can travel anywhere near the speed of light, for you to reach there and quell the rebellion. By the time the news is sent back, it would have been another 100,000 years. This is simply a time span longer than we humans as a species has even existed. This is totally unacceptable, of course. Hence, a lingua franca must be maintained, as is throughout so many states in history, be it the Achaemenid or the Roman. Now, all of this I have mentioned so far is tied to the child. After all, the child is the most important aspects of society. As I mentioned, he must be, or she must be, and I have to emphasize this, controlled, be taught a narrative of history, be reinforced of a religion since youth to understand the sheer importance of the states and its indivisibility, to produce children after children who would believe in the cause of empire. At the same time, they must be able to act on your behalf, able to think on a regional level. Hence, it's important for you to emphasize the glorious past of your empire, and through such, how they may one day contribute, how their individual heroism will ultimately benefit and advance the empire. What this means is that history, curriculum, and other ritualistic aspects, religion, theology, they would take a disproportionate role in the upbringing of the child. This may result in technological stagnation, but at the same time, the vast wealth of the capital may counterbalance this. At the end of the day, such vast empires is hard to be ruled with a bayonet and an iron fist. Hence, a velvet glove is most likely required. But this velvet glove can do what the iron fist cannot. It can penetrate the mind of the child and shape him into your puppet. And quite literally, I mean, remember, you are in a society that could presumably travel through the vast distance of space. Under such circumstances, it's very likely you would have mastered genetic tampering, genetic modification, as well as extremely advanced brainwashing techniques in order to create a society of drones, for lack of a better word, that are totally loyal and subservient to you. Now, this may, of course, impact creativity and impact the, innovativeness of your culture. Hence, this is most likely not to be done to the entirety of the population, but rather only the governing class, and only at a certain level. Hence, they must be able to maintain an independence of thoughts, otherwise, they fundamentally fail in their job as governor. The vast majority of the youth, so to speak, while being taught with a basic educational curriculum which stressed the glory of the empire, would nonetheless often leave, as pointed out earlier. After all, your empire is rather hierarchical and in many ways stationary and hard to move. Not to mention, under such systems, it's very likely that people will live a very long time, hence unwilling to give up their job or their position in society, forcing the creation of new societies. This would be a great source of innovation, and which ultimately must flow back to your capital city once more. Hence, to wrap up, your capital city is the core from which all wealth must flow in, and through such wealth, you must create an ideology that brings up each generation of faithful governors to be sent out, who in turn would do the dirty work for you and govern the vast empire. So, such may you enjoy your vast rule over space.